All right, welcome to a new episode of the Zero Technique podcast. I am your host, Ryan Stern, and joined with me is one of the new members of the Zero Technique podcast team and fellow member from backsportspage.com is Nate Angus. Nate, how are you doing tonight?
Hello, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on tonight, Ryan. I look forward to doing not only this episode of the Zero Technique Football podcast, but also future episodes. And I'm just very glad to be on board.
Yeah, so this is sort of a test show for us. We are sort of trying out a new streaming service. We are trying to work out some kinks. But we are definitely looking forward to coming at you on a weekly basis for all of your football talk. And I guess the biggest football news of this past week is the multitude of arrests that we have seen. We have DeAndre Baker and Quentin Dunbar getting in trouble down in Miami, Ed Oliver getting arrested, Cody Latimer. This is a weird time that we're living in right now with the coronavirus pandemic, and now we're seeing just a string of these arrests. And right now isn't a good time for the NFL to have to deal with something like this.
No, I mean, it's certainly not. And let's be real here. NFL players being arrested in the offseason is not necessarily a new phenomenon. I mean, this has been occurring for just about as long as NFL players have been in the league. But this is a particularly high number of arrests for 1 week, which is why it's concerning. And also, it's like you said, it's a bad time for the NFL PR wise in general. They have to answer the questions constantly of, will training camps open on time? What will the season look like? Will there be fans in the stadium? Where are you going to be playing your games? And they certainly don't want to have to deal with the arrests of players, particularly these high profile types of players. DeAndre Baker's a former first round pick. Cody Latimer's been a solid defender in the league for a long time. And Ed Oliver's no slouch either. I mean, these are some good players that have been, arrested within the past week here.
Yeah, Ed Oliver, coming out of the 2018 draft, was actually number 3 on my board. So this is someone who is one of the linchpins to one of the best defenses in the league. He's 22, has so much future and potential ahead of him, and he gets arrested for a DWI, unlawful possession of a weapon. You know that this is going to follow up with a suspension, and it really isn't a good look, especially for a team in Buffalo that now is in a division without Tom Brady, and they're now looked at by a lot of people as the leaders to take over as the new kings of the AFC East. And it's going to be a big hit for them if they lose Ed Oliver for a couple weeks.
Absolutely. I wouldn't just say that they're, by some people, expected to be a contender. I'd say they're the odds-on favorite to win the division. I mean, in New England, there has not been this much uncertainty surrounding a team since Tom Brady's become the quarterback and Belichick's become the coach. Yes, they still have Belichick, but are you really confident that a team quarterbacked by Jarrett Stidham is the odds-on favorite to win the division? Because I'm not. I mean, and Buffalo, I mean, their calling card is their defense. They have a versatile quarterback who can run the football and has some big playmaking ability. And now they've added guys like Stephon Diggs, who are solid playmakers on the outside. They drafted a running back, I believe. Like they're very equipped to not only win this division, but in my mind, they are right up there for me with the Chiefs and the Ravens as potentially making a deep playoff run. And their defense is a big reason why. And Ed Oliver is a huge piece of that defense.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, we think that Ed Oliver will be able to be back with the team. Again, all of this is still up in the air. We don't know what sort of season we're going to be seeing this year. We're assuming that we're going to have football. We just don't know if there's going to be fans in the stadiums. We don't know what sort of training camp, what sort of any type of off-season activities we're going to see right now. But again, like you had said, with someone like them missing Ed Oliver should be back towards the end of the year. But this is a team that needs to get off to a good start. They need to sort of show that they are for real. And again, without Ed Oliver, I mean, they're still a super talented defense. They've got playmakers at all levels. Tre'Davious White is, in my opinion, the most underrated defender in the league. He could have easily won the Defensive Player of the Year last year, if not for just one of the most outstanding defensive back seasons you'll ever see from Stephon Gilmore.
Had one of the best seasons that any defensive back. I mean, in my lifetime, I don't know that I've ever really got to witness defensive back play like that. I mean, he was holding top-notch receivers to less than 50 yards. Amari Cooper notoriously had like 2 catches for 19 yards against Stephon Gilmore pretty much the whole game, and Tre'Davious White's right up there with him. I mean, like I say, the Bills are still going to be a contender without Ed Oliver, but as you mentioned, they're one of those teams that needs to get off to a fast start. There are certain teams in the league where if they don't get off to a fast start, I'll say, you know what, those guys are okay. If the Chiefs don't get off to a fast start, I'm going to say, you know what, they have Patrick Mahomes, they have Andy Reid, they're going to be okay. The Ravens don't get off to a fast start, I'm going to say the same thing about Lamar Jackson and their whole offense. But if the Bills don't get off to a fast start, I'm going to start scratching my head a little bit and say, well, Miami's rebuilt a little bit. New England's never going to go away. And the Jets even have some young pieces that might lead them to a 500 season. So if they don't get off to a fast start, there's going to be a lot of doubt up in Buffalo from what was a big promise last year when they were able to make the playoffs and compete with the higher level teams in the league.
Yeah, so you mentioned one team that is going to intrigue me, especially all off season. And we were sort of talking a little bit before we went live. I found out about your disdain for any teams that are quarterbacked by Ryan Fitzpatrick. And the Miami Dolphins are now going into a season where they have finally the guy who is going to replace Dan Marino all these years later. I believe they've started 21 quarterbacks since Dan Marino retired, which is unbelievable.
Ridiculous.
They've gone through that
running back anymore.
Yeah, they've gone through that many quarterbacks without finding anyone who could even sniff the jockstrap of Dan Marino. But now they're going into a season where Ryan Fitzpatrick did establish himself within that offensive system last year, and they did draft Tua Tagovailoa, and we all know his injury concerns coming into the season. Now, a lot of people have been saying that he has been given a clean bill of health, but that was a scary injury that he had. Do you think that this is something that the Miami Dolphins are just going to say, Tua, this is your team now, you're going to be our starter from week 1? Or do you think they sort of ease him in, especially with the limited amount of offseason activities he's going to have, and maybe a couple weeks of Ryan Fitzpatrick, and then they ease Tua in down the road?
So for me, Ryan Fitzpatrick did play fantastic at the end of the year last year. To have Patrick Laird at running back and the receivers that he had around him, and to finish with 4 or 5 wins at the end of the year really is phenomenal. He played great, and I'm not going to take that away from Ryan Fitzpatrick, but in his NFL career, we've never seen him put 16 games together where he's looked like legitimate starting quarterback. He'll play like a starter and a good starter for 8 games. Then for the other 8, he'll look like he doesn't even belong in the NFL. And so for me, if I'm the Dolphins, I don't feel terrible about having him for the first 3 or 4 games of the year as my starter, knowing that I have Tua there whenever I need him. I know that, and we saw it with Fitzpatrick a couple of years ago when he was a Buck. He got off to a really fast start, and then they had to put Jameis Winston. That's not the same type of situation, because I think Tua has a high ceiling. I think that he is one of the most talented players that we've seen drafted at the quarterback position in a long time. And to be honest with you, I think that had this injury not occur, it wouldn't have been such a slam dunk of the draft who's the number 1 overall pick. Like, we'd have been seriously talking about, is Tua Tagovailoa as good as Joe Burrow? Because he's a high completion percentage guy, he's a high arm strength guy. There are all kinds of boxes that Tua checks. That being said, he does have a long list of injury history. He broke his index finger. He's got rods there. He's got 2 ankle surgeries, that freak hip injury. But a lot of those injuries have been exactly that, freak injuries. And for me, when an injury is repeated and it's like tweaks of your hamstring and you hurt your knee and you're sitting a week here and sitting a week there, that's more concerning to me than I had a couple big freak injuries, because those freak injuries aren't going to keep happening. Whereas if you're kind of soft, or if you're just sitting out for minor things all the time, that's a little more concerning to me. So I'd probably put Fitzpatrick in to start the season and then know that I have Tua waiting in the wings, or if there's enough offseason competition and you like what you see from Tua, start him right away.
Yeah, and so I'm definitely on board. I think that given the circumstances that we're in right now, Tua is not going to be able to develop a good enough chemistry with the receivers that he has, with the offensive line that he has, and the offensive line still is shaky. It's so shaky that they gave Eric Flowers $30 million to be a member of that offensive line. I think they reached in the first round for Austin Jackson. It's not one of the more comfortable situations I would want to have a quarterback, especially one who, like we've said, has a long injury history going into. I think it's a lot different with Tua than it is with Joe Burrow, because I think the Bengals offensive line is much better. I think they addressed it a little bit in the draft. They also get Jonah Williams back. Remember, Jonah Williams was their first round draft pick last year, drafted number 11 overall, and he didn't play at all last year. And the Bengals offensive line last year was still much better than the Miami Dolphins. And now they're getting one of the elite players in last year's draft right into the mix with Joe Burrow. So I definitely think that Joe Burrow is in a better situation, even with the limited amount of reps that he's going to get. What at least we assume it's going to be a limited amount of reps during off-season programs.
Yeah, and by all accounts, obviously I've never coached either Tua Tagovailoa or Joe Burrow, but by all accounts, Joe Burrow is a very smart quarterback. I mean, Joe Brady, the offensive coordinator for LSU last year, worships his field presence. He worships Joe's ability to quickly diagnose defenses and pick up a playbook. And I mean, a lot of those things like might go unnoticed by media and things like that, especially for a rookie quarterback. But for anybody who's ever played the position, you know how important those things are, especially moving up in a level. I mean, to go from playing at LSU where he had 3 NFL receivers, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and a cast of and Thaddeus Moss, and they were playing against basically college level DBs with NFL receivers. There were a lot of times, that's the big criticism of Joe Burrow, is will he be able to compete where he has lesser weapons? But, I agree with you that he's in a much better situation than Tua, because the Bengals offensive line is not nearly as bad as people believe it to be. He has Joe Mixon's a competent running back at least. I
think he's one of the more underrated running backs in the league.
At least a top 15 RB in the league.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then he has AJ Green. I mean, you never know whether AJ Green's going to actually play football or not, but he's slated to be on the outside. Tyler Boyd's not a bad player out of the University of Pitt. I mean, Joe Burrow could put together a 9-7 season to start, and that wouldn't be considered a failure in my opinion.
Not to mention they drafted T. Higgins at the top of the second round, and they do have John Ross, who hasn't obviously built the NFL career that he had hoped, only because he hasn't been able to stay on the field. But there was a stretch of 4 or 5 games last year where he was over 100 yards and multiple touchdowns. So we've seen what John Ross can do because of the tremendous speed, where he can just take the top off a defense. So even if you have the presence of John Ross on the field, it's going to open up so much more underneath, which is where I think Joe Burrow is going to succeed, because of his ability to diagnose those defenses. And if he sees that there's all of a sudden there isn't 8 in the box, there's 7, or maybe there's only 6 in the box, he's going to be able to diagnose that, to get his wide receivers into position to make the plays. I actually have higher hopes for the Bengals this year than a lot of people do.
Yeah, absolutely not. And I mean, they play in a tough division though. There's no bones about that. The Steelers are getting Big Ben back, and even though I'm a near Pittsburgh native, I don't think that the Steelers are necessarily the Super Bowl contenders this year that they've been in years prior. But Big Ben's a Hall of Fame caliber quarterback, and you can't can't underestimate what it's like to get him back, even though he's throwing to guys like Deontay Johnson and James Washington. And it's improbable that James Conner stays on the field for an entire season. I think there are a lot of question marks in the Steelers offense, but their defense is great. So I think they're at least a 9-7 team. I think that the Browns cannot possibly underachieve as bad as they did last year.
They are the Browns. They are the Browns. You can never count them out of being worse than they already were.
I think they're at least an 8-8 team, though. I mean, you can't have 2 all-pro receivers. I mean, their question is going to be, does Baker Mayfield play well or does he not? Is he the rookie Baker Mayfield or is he the sophomore Baker Mayfield? And regardless of that, they should at least be a 7-9, 8-8 team. The Ravens are legit. They have a stable of running backs. They have the best, probably the most athletic quarterback we've ever seen. They have a slew of tight ends that Lamar Jackson loves to throw to, and not to mention they have Hollywood Brown on the outside. I mean, I really don't see a scenario where the Bengals come out with a playoff spot, but to finish 8-8 or 9-7 in a transitional year for them, I don't think would be an altogether failure. And I think a lot of fans in Cincinnati would actually be happy with that.
Yeah, right now I think the deepest pool of talent of any division you can easily say is the AFC North.
Yeah, the AFC North and the NFC South with the Saints, Bucs, Panthers, and help me out here, Falcons is the other division that I like. Those are easily the 2 toughest divisions in football. And you know, the NFC West with the Seahawks and all them is probably a close third, but I mean, that's the AFC North is always a tough division, and you know, it's not easy to go play in Pittsburgh or Baltimore either. That's not a non-factor as well. So there are certainly some things that Joe Burrow has lying ahead of him that are struggles in his rookie year, but I mean, there's growing pains with any transition to any rookie quarterback. Even the first year that like Andrew Luck started for the Colts, he was like an all-time rated prospect. Like Peyton Manning's first year with the Colts. Like there's never a rookie quarterback that just steps in and all of a sudden he's leading his team to a Super Bowl. Like Patrick Mahomes being the exception in his first year as a starter, but he wasn't even a rookie that year. He set the bench his first year. There are plenty of rookie quarterbacks that take a year or 2 to get there.
Yep.
And I don't think that we should just count a highly drafted quarterback a failure because he doesn't win one in his first year. You know, I think that Kyler Murray had a very great rookie season, but he's got room to grow. Like there are plenty of times where, like, I'll give you a perfect example. Daniel Jones was drafted pretty highly last year for the Giants, and you're a big Giants fan. And when he came in for Eli, he played pretty well, but that's not his ceiling. There's growing pains with any rookie quarterback, and for as well as he played, man, he's got a lot to clean up. But you know, there's no guarantee that your rookie quarterback sees his maximum potential in the first year. And actually, I'd say it's probably the opposite.
Yeah. So in fact, one of the things that has really impressed me over this offseason has been at least the emotional maturity that we have sort of been able to see out of Daniel Jones. We've heard the reports that he's reached out to Tony Romo to see if he can get a better grip on the Jason Garrett offense, and also get Romo's feelings on what are better ways to be a better securer of the ball. That is the thing that Daniel Jones needed to work on the most. And in the few interviews that I've been able to hear from him, I know there was one on NFL Network, there was one on ESPN just over the past couple of weeks. And he has said that the thing that he has worked on the most this offseason has been ball security. If you can cut the amount of times that he turned the ball over last year in half, then the ceiling is just going to go from here and just up to here, because there's just going to be that many more opportunities that he's going to be on the field. He has another year, and the Giants didn't do a whole lot in terms of changing their offensive skill position.
No, their personnel pretty much identical to what it was last year.
they're still coming into the year with Sterling Shepard, Golden Tate, Darius Slayton, who may be one of the most underrated receivers in the league.
Evan Ingram's not a bad player.
Evan Ingram, if he can stay on the field, is a difference maker. And they have one of the 3 best running backs in the NFL in terms of talent.
You can make the argument that McCaffrey's a little better, but Saquon's at least the most talented running back in the league, and at worst, he's the 2nd best overall running back in the league. There's no quarrels about that. He's pretty good.
Yeah, the one thing that needed to happen, and there were 2 parts to this one thing. One was Daniel Jones needed to do the work himself, and the Giants needed to give him an upgrade at that offensive line, because ever since the 2011 Super Bowl, the Giants offensive line has been one of the bottom 5 offensive lines in the league every single year in, year out. And you cannot develop a quarterback in this day and age without having a strong offensive line. If your quarterback is getting hit or is in fear of getting hit every single down, there's only so much that he can live up to. So with the drafting of Andrew Thomas at number 4, where there were a lot of people who were shocked that they decided to go Andrew Thomas instead of Wirfs or Wills or even Mekhi Becton. But the one thing that you can say about Andrew Thomas is he is the most NFL-ready left tackle that there was in this year's draft. And the Giants knew they had to get better at left tackle to protect Daniel Jones's blind side. Nate Solder has been a complete bust. Yeah. Joe Judge has already come out and said that going into camp, Andrew Thomas will be the left tackle, and Nate Solder will be competing for the right tackle spot. Yeah. So that tells you all you need to know about what Nate Solder has done.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, their offensive line is bottom 5, and that's especially for a quarterback like Daniel Jones, who's not necessarily this like a Sandlot style quarterback that can run around and make plays off platform. Like he's more of your traditional pocket passing, hand the ball off, play action type of quarterback, which, believe it or not, is still acceptable in today's NFL.
Right.
But I mean, he can't perform well without someone, at least a few people at least, blocking for him. And I liked the Andrew Thomas pick because, like you said, he was the most NFL ready. If you're a different team other than the Giants, who already has some other options at offensive line, you might go with the guy with a little more upside. But for the Giants, Andrew Thomas was the right pick, I think, because he's just so much more of a sure thing. He's so much more of like an I can play in the NFL as opposed to a guy who maybe he is a left tackle, maybe he's not. And they really needed a sure thing at left tackle, so I didn't mind them taking him at 4.
All right, so we're gonna start wrapping things up. We are looking forward to, as it gets closer to what we hope is going to be training camp, what we hope is going to be preseason, we'll definitely be bringing you more shows of the Zero Technique Football podcast. Make sure that you are subscribed to the Backsports page YouTube account. Go to youtube.com/backsportspage. Also on Facebook, facebook.com/backsportspage, on Twitter and Instagram @backsportspage. You can find me on Twitter @rstern33. Nate, where are you on Twitter?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter @NateAngus8, the numerical 8. And you can find me on Instagram @NateAngus, and Facebook, just Nathaniel or Nate Angus. The search will do that. So yeah, be sure to follow us all, and we thank you guys very much for listening this week, and be sure to keep checking out our future episodes as well.
Yeah, and the show is on Twitter Zero Tech Pod, ZeroTechPod. And thank you everyone for tuning in, and we will catch you next week.